Hey, Dean, welcome back to the show.
Brian, it's great to be back with you.
Hey, you sent me some great topics. Anyone that you're really passionate about? You want to kick off, or you'd like me to pick it?
Well, listen, I'll let you pick. I know we had collaborated a little bit on some of the things that I see that I've done in my career and some of the things I see other salespeople doing that might be a little off target. So
Yeah,
maybe why don't you ask some questions, and then if I come up with some additional ones, we can go there.
cool. Let's start with like a champion, how to determine how good the champion is, or how qualified, or how usable. Usable is kind of a derogatory term, more realistic, I guess, because it all starts good, right?
Yeah. I think what I've seen, I've done this too. What happens is you think you have a champion, and in the end, you've really had a coach.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they provide good information, but really they're not selling on your behalf, which is one of the big things you want to test for. Are they aligned with the executives? Uh, Certainly the executive sponsor, the person with the purse strings, the ones that are going to make that project happen. Are they aligned with that person? And the other test, I think, Brian, is some of those executives to get their input on the individual that you think is your champion.
Yeah.
Because if you ask that question, they may say, "Oh no, he's a great guy or a great woman," but no, we really look to other people for the input, right?
They're not, they say, oh, he's a good guy. That's when you know it's not a champion, right?
Right. And so I think that testing is really important to do initially and then throughout as well. Let's make sure that sometimes people fall out of graces over the course, particularly if you're selling a complex, longer sales cycle solution.
Yeah.
You want to kind of test that throughout. The other thing that I found effective is tell me about a project whereby you spearheaded that particular project all the way through acquisition and the successful implementation of the project. Have them articulate that back to you. That's very helpful.
That's a good one. I like that one. And what are the signs that it's not a great coach that you've seen where you're like, or you've been tricked early in your career?
Getting bad information. Sometimes you get information that you think is the champion, and all of a sudden it's not in line with what you're hearing from management, executive sponsors. There's a misalignment in terms of the information you're getting. Of course, we don't do as many in-person meetings anymore, but I do look at where that person sits at the table.
Yeah.
Right? Little subtle things like that. If a question's asked internally, is that executive sponsor or management looking to that so-called champion for an answer? Those are the things I think you can pick up on.
Yeah. My litmus test was always, who are they all looking at in the meeting when
Yeah,
I ask a question?
right.
Because sometimes you have the young rascal who wants to take over, wants to prove how smart they are. But typically what I found was that the champion wouldn't be at the beginning of the meeting. They'd come in 10 minutes, 20 minutes after the meeting started, and everyone would turn their head towards them.
Yeah. And the other thing that again, regarding a in-person meeting is if you get those comments, and we all do during meetings that are not necessarily supportive of what we're trying to do, does that person step up and sort of answer it on your behalf almost?
Yeah.
That can be extremely important and valuable to you. So I find champions do that. I find coaches tend to sit back in their chairs and just let the wave kind of roll over them in the meeting and throughout the sales cycle as well.
Now, how can you tell? I think you answered it a little bit when you had them tell you a story about the full implementation. But that's rare, or that's hard, right? Because they start at the company, they pick products, and what does a full deployment mean? Is it release one? Is it full enterprise? What other things are you looking for? Because you can waste a lot of time on deals. And I got to
Outside of,
imagine.
are you talking about outside of the champion now?
Well,
Just other things that I look for that
yeah, because you've got, because we sold in the same space,
right.
and there were a lot of science experiments versus projects. Let's play with this for N number of months or years and hopefully buy it.
Yeah.
Or let's switch from this thing to this thing, but there's no compelling business driver behind it.
Especially now.
Yeah.
What we're facing, this, you live it every day. I live it every day. We're in a situation now where most of what everybody sells in the software business is subscription based. We're in a subscription economy. There are subscription contracts, which if you're not attached to a big issue or a big problem that is a priority of an executive sponsor, get that name, get to that executive sponsor early. To the degree possible, ask the 3 whys. Why do this? Why do it now? Ultimately, if you're early, you're not going to answer why me. That's going to take time to earn that trust and credibility through additional meetings and alignment. But those things are important. And as these CFOs are really ratcheting down these OpEx budgets. And so if you're not attached to a big problem that is committed, and I would say that is either some type of consolidation of other OpEx spends or drives to some type of efficiency, the revenue line is good too. But boy, I really err on the other because I'm seeing either cuts, maintain, or single digit increases everywhere I am right now. And so those tests are extremely important to get. Otherwise, if you don't test to that degree, you're going to spend a lot of time, waste time, and you're going to end up losing to the biggest competitor, status quo.
Yeah. And is that what you're seeing in your business? Status quo is always the big competitor?
When I look at last year, the success I had last year, I'm looking at one account. I did one major transaction, but I was after a second transaction. They ended up not doing it. It just wasn't, it didn't meet the litmus test that I just reviewed with you. It wasn't big enough. Yeah. It wasn't significant enough. What they were doing today had issues, but they weren't big enough issues with big enough impact that they were going to spend any real money to get it solved. And so on the one hand, I got a significant transaction, and the other, it was no decision at all, status quo.
Yeah. And have you had much success on the revenue side? Because the OpEx side is always tough, where you have the engineers want to do it because they're sick of maintaining the old thing. They want to do something new, increase the value of their market, their resume, their market rate.
Yeah.
When you have the revenue side, you can get on the line of business, which tends to have the C-suite's ear.
Yeah, I agree. I like I said, you need to look at both. Certainly, your discussions need to be around business. You don't want to sound like a salesperson. I know we both agree on that.
Yeah.
You need to be looked at. Doesn't mean yet salespeople, A players have good sales skills, and that's good, but you want to do it in a very collaborative way where you're aligning to the business. You're talking to the business, you're talking to those executives. And yes, I mean, they're looking at growth. And of course, in order to grow, you got to increase revenue. And so you want to look at that carefully. I mean, I look at some deals I did. Largely, it was around customers, how to better service their customers, how to reduce churn, how to increase, let's call it, not necessarily, this is a retail term, but how to increase their basket of goods that they're buying from the company, average sales price per transaction. All those things are being looked at, and they relate to that revenue piece. So I agree with you. I do think it's revenue, but I also think, you got to look at the other side too, because you've got the sales guys, the marketing guys, the CEO, and all that on the revenue side. And then you got that CFO that oftentimes the CIO and IT reports to, that is kind of turning the screws a little bit,
Yeah. Depending on the industry, I found, certainly retail's margins are really tight.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What would you say is your superpower as a salesperson? What sixth sense do you have that you think most reps haven't developed?
Well, I think most reps that are reps, elite sellers, whatever you want to call them, I don't know if I'm that much different than them. If I would say, I always try to look at myself like almost like a product. When I'm a product, I'm a product of myself. When I sell a product, I look for unique differentiation in order to position myself versus my competitors, and draw that out in a sales cycle. And I do the same thing with myself. I would say my ability to qualify quickly, my ability to have executive conversations where I don't sound technical. You tend to, I said this in our last interview, you're directed to people you sound like.
Yeah.
So I don't use acronyms. Never. I never use acronyms, or at least I don't try to, and I don't talk about product. I mean, reality-wise, particularly early in sales cycle, they don't care about your product and they don't really care about your company. They care about early on. Now they will at some point when you've earned the right and you're on that track of sales, they're going to want to care about your company, where you've done it before, how have those results been, what kind of service you have, what kind of support, what kind of consulting services, training. All of those things become important, but they're a little less important early on in the sales cycle. And that's really where you're collaborating and understanding their business, how they make money, who their competitors are, really understanding their business and what's standing in the way, in their opinion, of growth or becoming more operationally efficient.
Now, let's get into that. Can you give us an example of an executive conversation where you're not talking about product? What type of questions do you ask? How do you gain their trust? How do you pull out their personal win?
Well, much along what I just said, and it depends a little bit on the executive you're speaking with, but I always do a little bit of research. So I'll look through the forward of the annual report, quarterly report. I'll look for whoever I'm calling on. I'll Google them, see if they're talking about something that is of particular interest.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's pretty concrete on some issues that the company's facing or he's facing or he's trying to solve. And so I definitely take some notes. So you need to be prepared. And And so I will start to, I think it's important. If I have, let's say, a 30-minute meeting, I don't spend 20 minutes in rapport.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't. I've done that before, and you end up, I feel like at the end, you just miss the whole thing.
Yeah. You don't have time for anything else.
Yeah. I mean, I pretty much know every wine that the person likes, but
That doesn't get you for
it doesn't. So but rapport is important. So I do I look around the office, I try to pick up on something, and I'll ask, comment on their children, or if they went to a particular school, or if they have sports memorabilia, I'll say a word or two, just to kind of take them, because they're loaded. You know, I come in to a certain degree, I'm kind of interrupting their day.
You are, yeah.
And so I'll take them out for 2-3 minutes. I'll say a little bit something, and then I'll go right into something that I found. And I noticed one of the things that you commented on in a presentation you made on December 14th to a group of investors or whatever. You commented on the fact that you're really trying to reduce your churn. And then I'll use what I call my TED questions. Tell me, explain, describe. Tell me a little bit about that. And then I'll try to, what I call, kind of corny, but peel the onion and really understand the business issue as best I can. What I'm doing, of course, is I'm trying to align or attach my solution ultimately to what it is they're trying to solve.
Well, that's it. Because when you say, tell me about, it sounds like a question, but it's really a statement.
It is.
Yeah. And so it's very pinpoint, very bullseye.
I find people, if you do tell me, explain, or describe, which are my 3 favorite questions, honestly, in everything I do, they feel better about engaging, which is what you want. You want that engagement, as opposed to rapid fire questions. I mean, that people tend to get a little defensive, like, oh man, why am I answering all these questions?
It's true.
And it's a subtle difference, but you can pull more out if you position it properly.
Well, it also gives them a status feeling, like they know something you don't.
Exactly.
And
True.
people like that.
They do.
Yeah.
They
it is all
now,
about them.
I think attaching the personal stuff is always important, no matter who you're selling to.
Yeah.
And so I may ask 1 or 2 things. I don't delve into too much of that until I know the person a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I tend to get a little more of the personal wins, what they're trying to achieve, what's important to them. I don't get into too much of that in an initial meeting. I may say, relative to this thing you're trying to solve, what, from a personal perspective, what would that do? If that were to be solved, what might that do? Maybe you look better to the board of directors, to other senior managers, to maybe to your peers, to your customers, whatnot. So I will try and pull a little bit, but not a lot in an initial call.
And what are you looking for to come out of that where you say, this is a real deal versus a science experiment or an option?
I want them to take an action item. I always learned
homework.
I don't know, an assignment, I guess you could call it that. Got to be a little careful there, but I might say something. Of course, at this point, you've talked a little bit about your solution, how it might align to that. Not sure yet. I do a lot of that. I'm not sure yet if we have a fit or not, we have a solution or not. I think we do. And I'd be confident as I work my way through and have more meetings. What I'd like to do is get a recommendation from you as to who within the organization I should be speaking with to really understand more of how that executive priority translates into a corporate initiative and what elements in that corporate initiative they see as important parts to that.
Yeah.
And then how I can align to that. And then what I always ask for is, as I work through that and I get your recommendation down to those people, I'd like to follow up in several weeks or a month, depending on what you think. I'd like to come back to you and have another conversation in terms of what I've learned, what I feel we can do, and get your input as to if that's something you'd be willing to support. So asking for that return meeting is important.
Yeah. And what role do you feel most effective speaking with?
That's a good question. I'm comfortable at executive levels. I've spent a lot of time with chief information officers. I would say on the whole, probably CIOs, where I spend a fair amount of my time, clearly below that in management, IT management. In terms of what I sell, not too much in the developer ranks. They're normally involved in meetings, and I certainly need to talk to them and get their support. But most of my time is spent at management levels in IT and the CIO level.
And what do you think most reps misunderstand about speaking with executives?
I think, it's interesting. I think they're a little, I don't know if the word's scared.
Yeah, that's a good word.
But I don't know if maybe they don't have enough confidence in themselves yet, but this is probably true of newer reps. Although I've had reps that work for me that just have said to me point blank, we just don't feel comfortable in speaking at executive levels. And so I tried to up their skills in that area when I managed them. But at the end of the day, you need to have that confidence. You need to have that ability to talk to the business and avoid product discussions, avoid sounding technical, because they don't want to hear that stuff.
They wouldn't understand it.
They wouldn't.
No.
Nor do they want to.
They don't want to.
It's almost like a bell that goes off.
Yeah.
Use an acronym like, I don't know.
Two-phase commit.
Yeah, two-phase commit. That's a good one. Or async or something. I mean, boy, it'll send them over the edge.
Yeah. And, because I kind of learned by bringing my CEO with me early in my career. And I noticed that he never talked about the product.
I agree with that. I will tell you, I never use product names in my discussions. And we talked about this 18 months ago. I never talk about my competitors at all, ever.
Yeah.
Now, this is a trap. You asked me about mistakes. I'll tell you what, if you talk about your competitor and let's say you say something like, my competitor doesn't do X, and they find out that your competitor does X, by virtue of a new release, your credibility is shot.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'll be asked for information. I don't give any of that. Now, I'll look at our competitive team's information always with a grain of salt, but I will not talk about my competitors or anything like that, because I just think it's a mistake that a lot of reps make, and you can really step in a hole on that one.
And what do you think? Well, what's your belief that CIOs care most about? Because they're bombarded with sales requests. And if they gave a meeting to every salesperson that asked for one, they'd never have any time to do their job.
Well, of course, without getting specific on that, they care about the things they care about. I know that sounds a little vague. a question I always ask when I meet with CIOs, I want to know how much time they spend with the business and business leaders versus how much time they spend with IT staff and doing all of the things they need to do in IT. That tells me a lot.
Yeah.
One CIO in particular that I sold to last year, had a major transaction and sold to prior to that, spends about 80% of his time with the business. Well, you know that CIO is connected and knows as much about the business as the business leaders do. Those are the CIOs that I enjoy working with most because they really understand the transformational aspects of what they're trying to achieve as a business, and that it peels down into what I'm selling. The ones, and there are some like this that are just, I'll use the phrase keeping the lights on.
Right. Yeah. Firemen. Yeah.
Exactly. Those are the tough ones because let's say they're a current customer, they say, hey, we love what you're doing with us. We appreciate it. Nothing new on the horizon. That's typically what you get with that. Because they're doing a lot of application consolidation, which is fine. I mean, everybody should do that. And certainly the whole notion of moving to the cloud and that type of consolidation needs to be done. But I personally am attracted to the ones that spend more time with the business.
Yeah. And when you're sitting through a QBR, listening to other reps present their deals, what's going through your head? Let's say you don't manage them. They just happen to be on the team. You're stuck there. Your manager wants you to sit through it.
I shouldn't say this. I was going to say other than
not at this current company, at a past company.
Yeah, let's say other than boredom. Yeah. Let me tell you my philosophy on QBRs because it may help answer the question. I think QBRs, where you pull everybody together, should be more about sales development.
Yeah.
A little bit on the forecast, but more about sales development. And I'm really passionate about this because I did this a lot when I managed. I think so-called sales leaders are falling down on developing their sales teams. They are being pulled. Some of it's not their fault, but they're being too pulled into the administrative aspects of managing. Yeah. And I would rather come into a meeting with just myself and a few other people, or maybe a couple people, and let's take an account or two, and let's spend 2 hours on it. Let's pull it apart. Let's get that input from the other rep instead of them sitting there daydreaming. Let's get them to say, look, guys, you're missing some pretty important parts strategically on this account. Have you thought about this or that? That to me is far more effective than just bringing up Salesforce and all 42 opportunities and plodding through those for 2 days. I mean, that's the way I feel about it.
Reading the notes essentially out loud. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you were to teach a sales course, what would the topic be?
Another good question. I love your questions. They're always so poignant. I mean, I think sales process is important. So some process by which I'm going to call it a playbook or a sales process. I mean, let's say a football analogy. You're not going to go into a football game without a playbook and say, hey, we're going to wing it. We're just going to wing it.
We're just going to run out on the field, see what happens.
See what happens. So I would, whether it's my own, I'm not sure I really need to recreate the wheel. I think there's good ones out there. I don't happen to know yours. I'm sure it's good. There's force management. There's Miller Hyman. There's all kinds. Some are strategy, some are tactic, some are both. I think that's important, but then the humanistic aspect of how do you take that and create a unique value of yourself in that process by which you can more effectively understand the business, effectively qualify, direct sales campaigns, because customers oftentimes don't know how to buy. So, yeah. how you direct that stuff, and then ultimately how you close.
Well, that's it, because they know how to buy after they've already bought. They know how to buy another license, another seat, but they don't know how to change the stack or change how the company's run. It's new to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's interesting you ask that question, because that's something that I would love to do. I would love to get back to developing salespeople. I feel I'm good at it, but I don't know if I want to just train. I think I'd like to come back into management, where I would ultimately have a team and be able to do the things that I think are so important for those reps. I hope you're not picking up on any of that background noise. I'm getting a little noise. So.
Just a little, no. And when you see great reps or good reps, what do you see as the difference between like the B player and the A player?
I think our ability to size it up quickly, kind of sniff that out, and sniff that deal out, get locked in on it, because I'll tell you what, if there's what I say is, high activity doesn't mean productive activity. Are you doing the revenue generating activities? Are they prioritized? Are they prioritized into the qualified deals? And I think the elite sellers know how to do that slightly better than, everybody else.
Well, I think you made the good analogy with the football, because an experienced coach, football coach, can size up the opponent, size up the game, put together a strategy, find the weaknesses, and figure out a way of winning.
Yeah.
Or a lot of people are just like, throw me the ball, I'll run like hell.
Right. No, and that's all part of the sales motion. I would say the elite sellers know that sales motion really well.
Yeah.
And know how to execute it really well. It's like Walsh in the 49ers and in the 80s, man, he just had the thing wired up. He knew that West Coast offense. They executed it flawlessly with Montana and Craig and Rice and all those guys. And they were unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's similar in sales. It's just going out and executing like that.
Well, that's it. And it looks natural and flawless, but people don't see the preparation and the analysis and the planning that went into it.
That's right. So, yeah.
And people will just say, well, Dean, he's been doing this for a while. Second nature to him. But I bet you do a lot of research and prep before these calls.
I do, and I'll end, because I know we're getting close to the end here. I will say this, I will emphasize this. I think one of the biggest mistakes reps make is what I call assumptive selling.
Yeah.
And that is asking a few questions and then letting yourself and your mind leap to, well, I know exactly what it is they want, and not spending enough time in discovery, in qualification, really understanding current state and impact. And you spend a whole lot of time and you end up being misaligned. Brian, I think that is a huge one.
It's huge.
That really, I would end with that and saying, if you do nothing else, just take a breath, slow it down, spend that extra time, and make sure you're aligned and you get that feedback that you are aligned early in the sales cycle, and then you go through it and execute flawlessly.
Great. Hey, appreciate your time. It was good to talk to you again. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So it's Dean Weiner on LinkedIn. I'm relatively active, normally early in the morning and late at night. So they can find me there, and I always trying to pay it back. So if anybody needs any input from me outside of the wonderful input they always get from you, I'm happy to do it.